Hello everyone. Today we're here with Simon from Northumbria Police, right?
From Victims First Northumbria.
Oh, there you go. Victims First Northumbria. That's me not being prepared. Sorry about that. So Simon, I'm not going to ask you very many questions, specific questions, but I'm going to let you talk because I think you have plenty of stuff to tell people about. Tell us a bit about your background first.
My background is, go back approximately about 20 years, where I first started off as a sessional for Gateshead Youth Offending Team. So I primarily started from the offender standpoint, working as a sessional worker there, and was offered a full-time post at Gateshead Youth Offending Team, leading to a full-time post as Restorative Justice Co-ordinator manager. That included all of the community payback. But once again, it was the very early stages of the statutory requirements for youth offending teams and the victim contact. So we built up, from Gateshead, we built up a victim purpose that was embedded in the system from the very, very start. I then moved quite swiftly over. My head of service went to Sunderland Youth Offending Service, and she took some staff with her, and so I then moved over to the Sunderland Youth Offending Service, where I was Restorative Justice and still am, to a certain extent, Restorative Justice Manager and Sunderland Youth Offending Service. Now, Sunderland Youth Offending Service has its own victim team. It's there's different models for restorative justice in youth offending teams, and they're vastly different. Sunderland is very, very lucky. It has its own victim team, and that comprises of 2 full-time victim liaison workers, 1 part-time victim liaison worker, primarily totally dealing with restorative justice within the service. I also managed 10 sessionals and upwards. Also managed the referral orders, which is, as you may know, it's a statutory youth court order which allows victims to be invited to a panel, and that's been very, very successful in Sunderland. From there, I was seconded to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and from there, I am in Victims First, Northumbria.
I think, very many interesting things there. I'm going to start with your mention of the panels, where you have victims invited to take part on a panel. Can you explain that concept a bit more?
Yes, it's at the very first stages, the referral panels were set up as a restorative panel, primarily, and there's a whole load of training around volunteers being on the panel, where they're trained restoratively to facilitator level in Sunderland. They're trained restoratively so that a victim is invited. It's the only court order that I know in England at the moment where a victim is invited to that process. So an offender could say, I don't wish that, right? But if a victim wishes it and it's safe to do so, then we'll facilitate that the victim has that ability to face the offender and say how everything's affected.
But that's interesting because normally what you have with restorative justice in the traditional sense, if we can talk about something traditional that being so new, is that you have to have both parts being willing to meet.
You still do the full assessment. It still has to be totally appropriate. It's no good if an offender is not remorseful.
Or aggressive, for example.
Or anything like that. So you still have to go through the full process. It's just a little bit more time limited. And what you'll find is that an awful lot of referral panels don't have an awful lot of victims who attend. It differs from area to area as to which model they work, because of the time constrictions. So, for instance, it's a while since I've done one now, but you have to have a panel within 20 days of a substantive outcome.
Okay.
So getting a victim to panel and ready to go to panel within that time span it can be troublesome.
Well, this will be quite familiar for people that actually liaise with victims regularly. The emotional state in which they can be, it's not conducted to talk to them about facing their attacker, for example,
No.
or the person that robbed them.
No.
So it takes time, and
does.
you can actually push people in that sense. So,
So you have to be very wary about re-victimization. You have to do the full assessment process, much like we do with Victims First. Everything is around the process and making sure that it's a quality service.
Mm-hmm. What about this 20-day fairly artificial limit? Why is it there? I mean, whose benefit is that?
That was linked to the swift administration of justice element of the Crime Disorder Act and things like that. So there are ways that you can be fairly flexible around that. You just because you have won the first panel within a certain time, you can then invite a victim to another additional panel or something like that. So there's ways you can be flexible with it.
So in a way, you have to, I mean, not bend the rules, but you have to try to work with what you have so that it delivers to the victim.
Yes, it's about making sure that the victim's needs are dealt with firstly. From a youth offending perspective, you make sure that the balance is there for offender and victim. Mm-hmm. From Victims First, we are a victim-focused centre, a hub, so that we're primarily led by victim.
Well, it does what it says on the tin.
Yes, absolutely.
It's curious as well, because your background, you mentioned it before, you come from youth offending, and you have been in the past on the side of, well, not on the side, as in, you have been working with offenders.
Yes.
And now you're working primarily with victims.
Yes.
But obviously, because of your background, I imagine that you don't disregard the interests of youth offenders.
No.
And how are those taken care of? I mean, your remit at the moment is very much with victims, but I imagine that you have flexibility there to make sure that you have, whenever possible, you achieve positive outcomes for offenders as well.
Absolutely, and in Victims First, what we're doing is we've got a very a new process that we're linking in with the CRC, the local CRC, which is adult offenders. So we're getting both sides of it again. So we've got CRC secondees working within Victims First, liaising with our Victims First coordinators to ensure that the link up is there. So we ensure that there's remorse levels, the assessments are done properly, and it does have a benefit for the offenders as well. It would be wrong to dispute to minimise that, because offenders can get just as much out of it as some victims. They have the ability to move on after an offence if a victim is prepared to talk to them. It's voluntary from both perspectives. It also has the clear links with reducing reoffending and offending.
Mm-hmm. Which to many people that will be the key, because I imagine that I mean, perhaps not you directly, but a lot of services will be judged by the reducing rates in reoffending and crime in their areas and things like that. Mm-hmm. So how do you think that your work with victims, but also with offenders, fits in that drive towards reducing reoffending? I mean, how do you contribute to that?
Well, because when we work with restorative approaches, the benefit isn't just for the victim. When I like to see it as personalising things. A lot of offenders will minimise the actions, and if you can personalise it for them, it's almost like a light bulb moment, and they realise the impact that they've had on that particular person, and then they can. Once they see that, and once you can witness it in a restorative approach way, you can see the difference, and it makes them think about it. Mm-hmm. And if they're going to do the same thing again, if they're thinking about the same thing again, it changes their thought patterns.
So, let me see if I understand this. What you're saying is that many offenders, in their mind, they try to make it like, what I did wasn't that serious.
The classic one is, burglaries, they're insured, or it didn't really impact me. We like to think about the seriousness of offence isn't the criminal seriousness of offence doesn't directly link to the impact on the victims, because an impact on a victim can be something as simple as a public order offence, which is low gravity, but the impact on the victim can be massive. So and I was only shouting, examples such as I was only shouting in the street. It can have that impact, a massive impact on a victim. And once an offender hears that impact from the victim and has the ability to hear it and reflect on it, it does change them. It can change them.
Funny thing is that in the case of robbery, for example, a lot of people will think, it's the value of what has been stolen that determines the severity of the case. But in fact, for many people, it's not about the physical loss of stuff.
No.
It's about the sense of insecurity in their own homes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what restorative justice is tries to address to some extent, among other things. So how is it going so far? I mean, you said that you have been doing this for how long?
Ooh, more years than I can't remember.
And always in this same area?
15 plus.
Always in Gateshead and
Gateshead,
Newcastle?
Sunderland, yeah.
Okay, so what's the evolution that you may have witnessed over this time that you have been doing this?
At the very first instance, restorative justice was almost a sideline for youth offending teams. I think that's the best. And still, case managers tend to think of the offender more than the victim in some cases. I've seen it come to the fore. It's very, very much in the public mind at the moment. There's a lot of publicity around it. There's still a little bit of a lack of understanding around the process. A lot of people seem to think that it's a quick process. Sometimes it can be quick, but the amount of resources that go into it to get a positive output for a victim can be ginormous. And I think there's still a little bit of a lack of that understanding. We, in Victims First, we ensure that restorative justice and restorative approaches are embedded at the very first point. So it's embedded totally within the service. It's very much at the forefront. There's a lot of publicity. There's quite a few things that have been on television that are some not so positive. What you have got as well is you've got the Restorative Justice Council linked, and you've got accreditation. There's now 70 accredited practitioners, of which I'm one in the country. We've got the RSQM, which Victims First Northumbria is actively working towards. Okay, so I thought you may have it already. No, we're working towards it. We've had our first site visit, and we're scheduled for end of August. Yeah. So okay, and now that you mentioned RSQM, why is that important? Explain to us why you would consider that to be important. Well, that sits with the service, but from a public and a victim's perspective, it's, for me, I think that the victims should be able to, it's a quality mark that they should be able to rely on, so that victims can ensure that they get a type of quality of service that's it's got to be, it's maybe not the right definition, but if you go to a plumber, you don't just pick somebody from the street. If you go, you need somebody who is, the quality assurance is there, the processes are there, the assessments are right, because restorative justice in the wrong hands can be negative for a victim, and that we've got to make sure that doesn't happen. That's interesting that you mentioned it, because a lot of people resist the idea of even saying that restorative justice can go wrong, and the fact is that it can do, and it has gone in some cases. Not any that I personally know, but I know that some people have thought that they wish they had never participated, and it is a case. I mean, sometimes it's just but luck, but sometimes as well is the fact that we have set procedures. And you have different training that allows you to face different situations. But obviously, you need to have a minimum set of standards that are known to work to minimize risk. Because it can always happen. Yes. But you have to have those that, like you said, give victims assurance that every step possible has been taken to ensure that things don't go wrong. And when they do go wrong, you have protocols and you can do something to minimize damage. Absolutely. The other thing that was interesting to hear as well is your talk about youth offending teams, because they have been, I think, at the forefront of restorative justice, because
it has generally been seen as one of those elements, giving a second chance to boys and girls as well that get into trouble. But now you're saying, some of them are not fully persuaded by restorative justice. They don't even know exactly what it is.
They have different models. It's a very much you can have a case manager who's offender based, and quite rightly, because they are youth offending teams. You can have a case manager who's offender based and only thinking about the safeguards for the offender, how they get the offender through their court order, a positive outcome from their offender. And so when you bring the victim into it, and up to 14, 15 years ago, it was a bit of a newbie when they first came in. So what was happening was it's a slow turnaround. You need to ensure that the balance is right, and it can be just as dangerous when it's too victim focused as opposed to too offender focused. So you need to make sure that the balance is right, and just it's a slow bus. Some models are still not as victim focused as they need to be.
Do you think that because you have youth offending managers on the one side defending the interest of youth offenders, and then you have people in victim support or victims first who are on the side of victims and defending their interest, do you think that's a bit of a confrontational model where because of how it is structured, it is difficult for you to collaborate?
No, there's the answer.
Well, that's a good answer there.
Not if the relationship is there, the understanding, the liaison, and the communications there. Victims First Northumbria, we have the links with all of those agencies. We have the contact with CRC, probation, the yachts in the area, the secure estates in the area, and in actual fact, we're working towards a restorative Northumbria, trying to get those agencies all to have the RSQM as well, and that's a key thing, so that we're all working from the same element.
Okay, so I'm going to go into my last two questions. The first one is, you are a practitioner. Can you tell us, obviously without naming names, any particularly good cases where you thought that something was done very well, something that could serve as an example to others, that was successful, because obviously you put the interest and you had a good team, but also because the right circumstances? Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah.
Something inspirational.
Yeah, I mean we've had a few cases here at Victims First Northumbria, where we've managed to do an informal process sometimes, which not the formal process, not the sitting down around the table. We managed to do it on the spot. Still having done the assessments and making sure that everything was right, and that the remorse levels were there. And there's two members of the team that have linked up with our CRC colleague and actually delivered a conference. It was really good to see the link up and the liaison and them working together. And that's quite a new thing, because there's a little bit of a gap in the adult offender market. That's not quite right, but market segment, yeah. So there's a little bit of a gap. So the youth offending has a statutory victim requirement. There's a little bit of a gap with the adult ones. So Victims First Northumbria has attempted to fill that gap, and one of the recent ones was that we had an assault, and it was linked to the liaison between the two. The offender was remorseful. The ability to facilitate that conference. It was a quick conference, it didn't take long, but both parties were extremely happy with it. We've done the satisfaction with it. The offender hasn't offended, not as far as we know as yet. So that was a good example of how it all links up, and the liaison. You were talking earlier about is there any barriers? It's a good example of breaking those barriers. We've had another classic case where I'll go back to my youth offending recently, where the victim signed off and said at the end of a conference, I don't feel a victim anymore. and that was quite powerful.
And that is, in fact, the best outcome possible.
Absolutely.
And that's great. I'm going to go for the last question, which is, I mean, you seem to be doing great work here, and you personally seem to be very happy with your work here. And I suppose that it does help to work with people and see that things, positive things do happen. What do you see as the challenge? What do you perceive as the challenges going forward?
Well, firstly, I'd say I'm very, very lucky to work here. I'm very lucky to work for a PCC who is very restorative justice minded. And the challenges are to move it forward. It's not a quick process, as we've discussed, as you well know. And the challenge is about managing expectation, as far as I can see, and moving on, making sure that we get the RSQM, making sure that we have lists of victims that are happy with the process, where they've had positive outcomes. Challenges are keeping that message there and sending it out.
Well, that's fantastic. I think that, I mean, RSQM you practically have. You have it in the pocket.
Well, I hope so.
But everything else, it's pretty much, I think it's pretty much the same as many organizations, you know, raising awareness and making sure that you continue to have the support and you can deliver I mean, in this case, the numbers, but obviously the outcomes more than the outputs, the outcomes, positive outcomes for people. Well, Sam, thank you very much for your time. I mean, it has been extremely interesting. So thank you for your time and thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Well, there you go, 21 minutes.